Hello, and welcome to the second lab, which is our thermochemistry lab. So for our thermochemistry lab, we will be using a thermometer, beakers, coffee cup calorimeter, sodium hydroxide in solid form, along with sodium hydroxide in aqueous form, and hydrochloric acid in aqueous form as well. Now, during this, we will be trying to measure out the actual change in enthalpy, or delta H, for these reactions. You'll see that we will also be utilizing and implementing Hess's law, saying that we will do 3 different reactions, with the first 2 adding up to give us the delta H for the third one. And the only real reaction happening is going to be the sodium hydroxide plus the hydrochloric acid to yield water and salt, NaCl. Now, to measure all of this, we'll also be using a graduated cylinder. This is useful because, as you see, is able to measure out our 50 milliliters very well. In addition, to measure out our solid components, we'll be using this analytical balance or scale and a weigh boat to measure those in addition. So part A is mixing aqueous hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide. We're going to do that in this coffee cup calorimeter, as you can see here. Now, the calorimeter has 2 holes, one for our thermometer and one for our stir rod. Thermometer will measure our temperature change, and our stir rod will allow us to mix all the chemicals inside. Now we're going to measure our hydrochloric acid, 50 milliliters of that, using our graduated cylinder. Now it's important to mention that this is a 1 molar solution, meaning that it is 1 mole per liter. So if we use 50 milliliters, that's 0.05 liters. We're also using 0.05 moles of HCl. So we want to make sure that we measure from the bottom of the meniscus. So adding just a little bit more will let us get to there. Perfect. So 50 milliliters of aqueous hydrochloric acid. We will then put that into the coffee cup calorimeter. The calorimeter will act as a very good insulator, so all of the heat that comes from the reaction we're about to do will be self-contained inside of this calorimeter. So we will need to take a temperature differential, so a final and initial temperature. So we will first take the initial temperature before we add the second reactant. So initially, you'll see that it is around room temperature in Celsius. So about 21.7 or so degrees Celsius. Now we must get ready to add our second reactant, which is our aqueous sodium hydroxide, which also has a concentration of 1 molar or 1 mole per liter. All right, so get 50 milliliters of that, and we will get ready to add that to our HCl. Now, the second that we add this, we need to be able to stir well and measure the temperature change. All right, so we've added that. Now we're going to stir and watch the temperature increase on our thermometer. We can see it's already jumped up quite a bit from the temperature it was before. So we get about 29.9 degrees Celsius as our final temperature. So to take our delta T, we'll have our initial minus final. And before we do our second trial, we'll go ahead and discard our products. So since the product is NaCl, sodium chloride, and water, it is safe to pour down the sink. Of course, sodium chloride is just table salt. So we'll make sure to get all of that out. Wash out our calorimeter. And one more time, we can use it again for trial 2. So we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're just going to speed up our video a bit so we can use our different, or we'll get a different initial and final temperature, as you will see. Once again, we have added HCl. We've prepared our sodium hydroxide. We'll measure the initial temperature. Here you go, about 20 degrees. Then we'll add our second reactant, our sodium hydroxide, swirl, stir, and then measure the final temperature after it's stabilized. So there you go. All right, so that was part A. For part B, we'll be dissolving solid sodium hydroxide in water, and we're measuring the temperature increase from that. So for this one, we're going to actually dissolve it in deionized water, 50 milliliters to be exact. And we'll measure out our 50 milliliters of deionized water and then go ahead and pour that into our coffee cup calorimeter in order to take our initial measurement. So you'll notice it's still about room temperature. About 20 degrees. And now we will need to add our 2 grams of sodium hydroxide in solid form. So I'm going to put my weigh boat on the scale, tare it, and then look at the sodium hydroxide, make sure it's right, and you put that on the weigh boat on top of the scale. All right, so as you see, we got exactly about 2 grams. We'll record that in our lab notebook. And now we'll prepare to put it into our water. So I want to try to add it all at the same time. So I'll transfer it to the speaker first and quickly, or at the same time, add it to the water because the chemical reaction will start immediately. All right, now that it's in, I'll stir well and watch as the temperature will rise. I want to make sure that everything gets dissolved. So you can see the temperature rising. It looks like it stabilized at about 30 degrees Celsius. So that'll be our final temperature for this. Now, of course, we will safely discard of our sodium hydroxide and do the same thing again for trial 2. Our initial temperature there is about 19.5 degrees Celsius. We'll weigh out about 2 grams of sodium hydroxide. So exactly 1.99 grams. We'll go ahead and transfer that into our coffee cup calorimeter and stir it well. Now we can watch the temperature increase. So we get a final temperature about 29 degrees there. Now for the last part, or part C, we will combine the first two. So we're going to dissolve solid sodium hydroxide in aqueous hydrochloric acid. So that is part 1 plus part 2. So we're going to start by having 50 milliliters of our aqueous hydrochloric acid, 1 molar, and add that to the calorimeter. You want to make sure you get exactly 50, measuring from the bottom of the meniscus. So we will go ahead and add that to our coffee cup calorimeter. We'll also measure out 50 milliliters of water. Make sure it's exactly 50, measuring once again from the bottom of the meniscus, and we'll add that to our coffee cup calorimeter. So right now, we just have water and HCl in our coffee cup calorimeter. So we'll get it well homogenized and then record the initial temperature, which should still be around room temperature. You see it's about 20.5 degrees Celsius. Then we'll go ahead and weigh out our 2 grams of solid sodium hydroxide. So I want to get to as close to 2 grams as possible. All right, so we got to 2.01 grams of solid sodium hydroxide here. Then I'm going to go ahead and get ready to add that to our aqueous reactants. So there we go. Make sure to get all of the solid sodium hydroxide out. Perfect. Now that the reaction has started, I'm going to stir it well and watch the increase in temperature. So if you take a look, you'll notice the temperature has increased. Now it's stabilized. So the final temperature has gotten to about 31 degrees Celsius. So quite a large jump there. Now we're going to do that whole thing again for trial 2. So 50 milliliters of our HCl solution. $50 milliliters of deionized water. We will measure our initial temperature. About 20 degrees Celsius. We will go ahead and measure out about 2 grams of solid sodium hydroxide. So 2.02 grams is what we've actually gotten. We'll go ahead and transfer that into our coffee cup calorimeter, shake it very well, and go ahead and watch the temperature increase. So our final temperature is also about 29.9 or 30 degrees Celsius. All right, that's all. Thanks for watching.